The river was calm the night Adiz went back to it. 9 years had passed, but the water remembered her the way water always remembers what is given to it. She stood at the edge in her white Agbada-trimmed dress, the one she'd worn to a charity gala only hours earlier, heels sinking into mud her feet hadn't touched in 9 years. The moon caught the surface, and for one breath, one single breath, she saw a face rise just beneath the ripples. Not her own. Ngozi's. Adiz stumbled back, heart slamming, and when she looked again there was nothing but black water and the croak of frogs in the reeds. She told herself it was exhaustion. She told herself a lot of things now. 9 years earlier, none of this would have made sense to her, because 9 years earlier, she had nothing to protect. Adiz and Ngozi grew up on the same red dirt street in a town so small it didn't appear on most maps, where the only paved road led to the church and the only running water came from a borehole shared by 11 families. They had been inseparable since they were 6, the kind of friendship built on shared hunger, shared secrets, shared dreams whispered under one wrapper at night when the heat made sleep impossible. But their lives had never been equal, even as children. Ngozi's family, though poor, was steady, her father a quiet carpenter, her mother selling akra by the roadside, both of them loving in the plain, unspectacular way that didn't make headlines but kept a child fed and safe. Ngozi never wanted much beyond what she had. She used to say, "As long as we are together, I don't need anything else." Adiz's house was a different kind of poor, the kind with shouting in it. Her father had left before she could remember his face. Her mother worked 3 jobs and still came home owing someone money. Adiz grew up watching debt collectors knock on doors, watching her mother's hands shake counting naira that was never enough, and somewhere in that watching, something hardened in her. She decided very young that she would not live like this forever. By the time they were 24, Ngozi was newly married to a good man named Chidi, expecting their first child, still selling akra beside her mother on weekends because she liked the rhythm of it, liked being useful to people she loved. Adiz was drowning. She had moved to the city chasing a business degree she never finished, taken a loan she couldn't repay from a man who was not the kind of man you wanted finding your address, and was now 3 months behind on rent in a Lagos apartment she'd lied to everyone back home about, telling them she was doing well, almost made it, just a little more time. The man she owed, Oga Ben, did not deal in patience. 3 days, he told her, standing too close in the stairwell of her building, his voice flat in a way that frightened her more than shouting would have. 3 days, or your mother's house in the village, the one she finally finished paying for, it becomes mine. Adiz went home that night and did not sleep. She thought of her mother's hands. She thought of debt collectors. She thought of every version of herself that had promised, as a child, to never let her family live like that again. And somewhere near 2 a.m., scrolling through nothing in particular, she found it, a post in an old community forum, half joke, half warning, about the river spirit's shrine, the old one behind their hometown that the elders never spoke of by daylight. People say if you go with the right offering and the right need, the river answers. But it always takes payment equal to the wish. Boys. She told herself she was only curious. She was lying even then. Adiz went home for the first time in 2 years, telling her mother it was just a visit, that she missed the village air. In truth, Oga Ben's deadline had given her 3 days, and going home felt like the only place left where her panic could breathe, and where, if the forum post was even half true, she might find something to save her. Her mother cried at the door and held her too long, and Adiz had to look away so she wouldn't change her mind. That night, while the house slept, she walked the old path to the river, the same river she and Ngozi used to wash clothes in as girls, the same river where they'd once raced paper boats and screamed laughing when a fish brushed their ankles. The shrine wasn't much to look at. A worn stone altar half swallowed by moss, cowrie shells scattered at its base, faded cloth tied to the low branches above, offerings from people whose names the forest had long forgotten. Adiz knelt, feeling foolish, feeling desperate, feeling both at once. "I need help," she whispered to the water. "I'll give anything." The river did not answer in words. It answered in stillness, a stillness so complete that the frogs stopped croaking, the wind stopped moving the leaves, and Adiz felt, rather than heard, a presence settle around her like cold water rising past her ankles though she hadn't moved. Anything, a voice said, neither male nor female, neither young nor old, is a dangerous word, daughter. Say what you actually mean. Money, Adiz said, voice shaking. Enough that my mother never has to worry again. Enough that I never have to be afraid again. That is not free. Nothing taken from this water is free. I don't have anything to give. I have nothing. You have a name you love more than your own life. That is worth more than gold to those who live beneath. Adiz didn't understand, not fully, not yet, and some small, surviving part of her wanted to get up and run home and never come back. But Oga Ben's voice was louder in her memory than any river spirit's warning, and fear has a way of making people agree to things they will spend the rest of their lives regretting. Take what you need, she said. Just help me. The water went still again. And then, simply, it is done. The river will come to collect within 3 days. Adiz walked home in the dark, telling herself nothing had really happened, that she'd imagined the whole thing, that grief and fear had made her hallucinate at a riverbank like a madwoman. She did not yet know what collect meant. 2 days later, Ngozi found her sitting alone near the old washing stones, and lit up the way she always did, like Adiz's presence was still, after everything, the best part of her day. You came back and you didn't tell me? Ngozi laughed, pulling her into a hug. Look at you, big Lagos woman, hiding from me. They talked for hours like no time had passed, Ngozi rubbing her growing belly, talking about names for the baby, about Chidi's new contract job, about how she still made Accra the way Adiz's mother taught her. There was no suspicion in her at all. There never had been. Ngozi did not know how to look at Adiz and see anything other than the girl she'd shared a wrapper with at 6 years old. Walk with me to the river before I go, Adiz said, voice tighter than she meant it to sound. For old times. Ngozi didn't hesitate. Of course she didn't. What happened at the river that evening, Adiz would spend 9 years trying not to remember in full. The water rising in a way water should not rise on a calm evening with no rain, the current pulling with a strength that had nothing to do with weather, Ngozi's confused cry cutting short, and Adiz standing frozen on the bank, telling herself this was not her doing, this was the river, this was the spirit. Her hands were clean even as she did nothing, to reach in after her. By morning, the village wept for a tragic accident. A pregnant woman, swept away while walking near water she'd known her whole life. Such a terrible, senseless loss. Adiz cried at the funeral with everyone else. She told herself the tears were real. Perhaps, in some buried way, they were. 3 days later, an anonymous transfer of more money than she had ever seen in her life appeared in an account she didn't remember opening. No note. No explanation needed. She left for Lagos within the week and never looked back. For 9 years. 9 years is long enough to build an entire person from scratch, and Adiz had done exactly that. The money from that first transfer had been seed, not harvest. She was clever enough, hungry enough, to turn it into something that looked legitimate from the outside. A boutique import business, then a stake in a beauty line that took off faster than she dared hope. By the time she was 33, Adiz Okonkwo was a name people recognized at galas, a face on minor business panels, a woman with a penthouse in Victoria Island and a closet that had long ago stopped feeling like a luxury and started feeling like proof that she had escaped, proof that the girl who watched her mother count naira by candlelight no longer existed. She rarely thought of Ngozi anymore. Grief, she'd learned, could be filed away like any other inconvenient document, as long as you were disciplined about it. Her engagement to Kelechi Adeyemi had been announced 3 months ago, splashed across enough society blogs that her mother, still in the village, had been stopped in the market and congratulated by women who didn't even know her personally. Kelechi was old money, polished, the kind of calm that came from never once worrying about rent. He looked at Adiz like she was a woman who had built herself out of nothing through sheer will, which was, in its way, true. She told herself, most days, that she deserved this. The river had simply helped her take what was already hers to take. It was at their engagement party, under string lights on a rooftop overlooking the lagoon, that Adiz first saw her. The woman stood near the edge of the terrace, back turned, wearing a dress the color of deep water. Something about the set of her shoulders made Adiz's stomach drop before she could explain why. She excused herself from a conversation mid-sentence and crossed the roof, heart going fast for no reason she could name. "Excuse me, do I know you?" The woman turned. She was beautiful in an unplaceable way, late 20s maybe, skin smooth and dark, eyes a shade too still for a party this loud. And for one disorienting second, one single, vertiginous second, Adiz could have sworn she was looking at Ngozi. Not Ngozi as she would have aged. Ngozi exactly as she'd been the last morning Adiz ever saw her alive. Then the woman smiled, polite and unbothered, and the resemblance scattered like it had never been there at all. "I don't think so," the woman said. "I'm a friend of Kelechi's cousin. I'm Amara." "Sorry, you just look like someone I used to know." "People say that a lot," Amara said, and something in the way she said it, mild as a knife wrapped in cloth, made the hair rise on Adiz's arms. "I have one of those faces." Adiz laughed it off, blamed the wine, returned to her fiancé's side. But for the rest of the night, every time she glanced toward the terrace, Amara was already looking back at her, patient, unhurried, like a woman who had all the time in the world and intended to use every second of it. Adiz told herself, for almost 2 weeks, that Amara was a coincidence. Lagos was a big city, but the wealthy circles inside it were small, incestuous, the same 100 faces rotating through the same 100 rooms. It was natural that a friend of Kelechi's cousin would keep appearing. It was not natural that Amara seemed to know things she had no way of knowing. At her wedding dress fitting, surrounded by tulle and pins and her mother's careful hands smoothing fabric at her hips, Adiz glanced up at the mirror and saw, for half a second, not her own reflection but the riverbank, water rising where there should have been carpet, a hand reaching up through fabric. She gasped, stumbled, and the seamstress apologized for pricking her, certain it was the pin. It hadn't been the pin. That night she dreamed of the river for the first time in years. Not the panic dream of guilt she'd had in the early months after. This was different, slower, almost gentle. Ngozi sat on the washing stones the way she used to as a girl, feet in the water, looking at Adiz with an expression that wasn't anger. It was worse than anger. It was patience. "You still haven't said it," Dream Ngozi said. Out loud. To anyone. Not once in 9 years. "Said what?" Adiz asked, though some part of her already knew. "What you did." She woke up at 4 a.m. with her sheets soaked through with sweat and the unshakable certainty that the dream had not been only a dream. 3 days after that, Amara appeared at Adiz's office. Not invited, not announced, simply seated in the reception area when Adiz stepped out of a meeting, flipping through a magazine like she belonged there. "I was in the area," Amara said, before Adiz could ask. "Thought I'd say hello properly. We didn't get to talk much at the party." "How did you know which building?" "Kelechi mentioned it." Amara's smile didn't move past her mouth. "You seem tense, Adiz. Is everything all right? You have the look of someone carrying something heavy." The way she said Adiz, slow, deliberate, like she was testing the shape of the name in her mouth for the first time, sent ice through Adiz's chest. She hadn't told Amara her first name. She was certain of that. Certain. "I should get back to my meeting," Adiz said, already backing toward the door. "Of course." Amara stood, smoothing her dress, and for just a moment, one terrible moment, her eyes seemed to hold too much water in them, like looking into a well instead of a face. "I'll see you soon. We have a lot of catching up to do, you and I." Adiz didn't sleep that night either. By the end of that week, she was unraveling in ways she couldn't hide from Kelechi anymore, snapping at staff, canceling meetings, staring too long at still water in glasses, in sinks, in the infinity pool at the penthouse she could no longer bring herself to swim in. Kelechi, gentle and concerned, asked if the wedding stress was getting to her, if she needed to see someone, take a break, talk to a doctor. She almost told him everything once, the words right at the edge of her teeth. She didn't. That night, alone on the balcony with the city lights blurring below her, Adiz finally let herself say what she'd refused to think clearly in 9 years. Ngozi is not gone. And she is not finished with me. If a story like this has ever made the hair rise on your arms the way it's rising on Adiz right now, if you believe some debts really do follow you no matter how far or how fast you run, drop a comment telling us which sign you'd have noticed first, and subscribe so you don't miss where this goes. Because what happens next is the part nobody who's heard this story ever forgets. Amara came to her 3 nights before the wedding, and this time, Adiz didn't wait for her to appear by accident. She found Adiz alone at the same riverbank from the cold open, though Adiz would later swear she had no memory of driving the 4 hours back to the village, only of arriving, as if the road itself had carried her there. The water was unnervingly still. Amara stood at the edge of it, barefoot, the hem of her dress darkening where it touched the current. "You don't have to keep calling yourself Amara with me," Adiz said, voice breaking on the words she'd held inside for 9 years. "I know who you are." I wondered how long it would take you to say it. The voice that answered wasn't quite Amara's polished party voice anymore. Underneath it was something older, wetter, the same voice Adiz remembered from the shrine. 9 years, Adiz. 9 years of weddings and galas and a name with someone else's surname stitched onto it. And you still couldn't say my name until I made you remember how to be afraid. I'm sorry. The words came out in a rush, ugly and too late. I was scared. I owed a man money. My mother was going to lose everything. I didn't think. You thought plenty. Ngozi's voice, for it was Ngozi now, the spirit no longer bothering to wear Amara's calm, cracked with 9 years of held grief. You thought about yourself. You thought about your debt. You never once, not for a single second at that water's edge, thought about me. About my husband. About the child I never got to hold. Adiz sank to her knees in the mud, the same mud from the cold open, the same dress soaking through. What do you want from me? Tell me what you want and I'll do it. Money, my company, anything. I don't want your money. Ngozi knelt too, suddenly closer than should have been possible, her face inches from Adiz, eyes holding that same impossible depth of water. The river doesn't deal in money for this kind of debt. It deals in truth. You have spent 9 years building a beautiful lie on top of what you did to me. The only way I am freed, the only way either of us is freed, is if you say it. Not to me. To them. Everyone who believes the lie you've been living inside. They'll destroy me. I was already destroyed, Ngozi said quietly. You only had to live with the silence. I had to live with the water. 3 days later, in front of 200 guests gathered for what should have been her wedding, Adiz stood at a microphone she was never supposed to speak into uninvited and told the truth. She told them about Oga Ben and the debt. About the shrine, and the bargain, and the price she hadn't understood until it was too late. About walking Ngozi to the river for the last time, and standing on the bank doing nothing while the water did what she had asked it to do. The room did not gasp in the way television had taught her rooms were supposed to gasp. It went silent in a much worse way, the silence of 200 people quietly recalculating everything they thought they knew about the woman in front of them. Kelechi left without a word. Her business partners followed within the month, once the story reached the blogs that had once congratulated her in the market. The penthouse, the boutiques, the careful 9-year architecture of a stolen life, all of it came apart not through fire or flood, but through the simple, devastating weight of a truth finally spoken aloud. Adiz did not go to prison. There was no law, after all, for what the river had done with her wish. But she went back to the village, to her mother's small house, and stayed there, not as the woman who'd escaped, but as the woman everyone now knew had run. She visited the river once more before she left it for good. The water was calm, the way it always was after it had been paid. She never saw Ngozi's face in it again. Some say that means Ngozi finally found peace, freed by the truth she'd waited 9 years to hear spoken aloud. Others say the river simply doesn't show its favorites twice. Once is warning enough. Either way, the elders still tell their daughters, even now, the river always remembers what was given to it. And debts paid in silence are never really paid at all. If this story stayed with you the way it stayed with everyone who's ever heard it, subscribe, because the river has more than one story to tell, and we'll be back next week with another.